Well, for those of you who I have not met, I'm Duke Blackwood, and I'm the director of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. On behalf of Mrs. Reagan and all of us who work here at the Library and Foundation, welcome. Tonight, we honor another great president, Abraham Lincoln. Speaking of honor, please stand and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance to honor all of our men and women in uniform protecting our liberty and freedom around the world. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Please be seated. I can't help but think about what, back in 1860, what Abraham Lincoln was thinking about when he saw the flag. But before we hear from our speakers tonight, I would like to recognize some special guests in our audience. First, I'd like to express our gratitude and sincere appreciation to our friends from the Lincoln Club of Orange County who sponsored this event. Thank you. And what an exhibit it is. You might not be aware, but this exhibit contains hundreds of artifacts from more than 25 lenders across the country. We are fortunate to have a few of them with us here tonight. I'd like to recognize those. First, Wayne Whalen, Carlin Norowski, and James Cornelius from the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Foundation. Then Seth Mungartz and Lane Dunham from Hildene, the Lincoln Family Home. Individual lenders, I hope they're all here, Charles Bivens, Ronnie Palager, Kazuhiro Tsuji, and Louise Taper. Next, all of the fine people here with us tonight from DreamWorks Studio, including their Senior Vice President from Asset Management and Archives, Anthony Jackson. DreamWorks? Finally, I'd like to give a special welcome to our curatorial staff, headed by our curator, Andrew Wolf. His team includes Beth Caleros, Barbara Carrata, Patty Marion, Jennifer Torres, and Rob Zuka. And I couldn't think of a better way to recognize them with the special white glove applause. Stand up, guys. You guys did an outstanding job. Your hard work and dedication. We are here today to pay tribute to our nation's 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. President Reagan, as he often did, captured the essence of President Lincoln when he said, quote, "Even in the bleakest moments, even when he set his face grimly toward war, he was untouched by cynicism or loss of faith. Mr. Lincoln believed. He believed in freedom, believed in the goodness and the ability of his heroes, the people of this country. Lincoln's greatest lesson is a lesson in liberty. He understood the idea of human liberty is bound up in the very nature of our nation. He understood that America cannot be America without standing for the cause of freedom. The exhibit explores the amazing life of our 16th president, commemorates the Civil War, and marks the 150th anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation. It incorporates over 250 original artifacts from more than 24 world-class collections, institutions, and individuals. Here are a couple of the featured items. His earliest childhood's writing, a Lincoln-signed copy of the Emancipation Proclamation and the 13th Amendment, a bloodied pillow on which President Lincoln laid his head to rest at the Peterson boarding house following his assassination at Ford's Theater. Then there's the handwritten personal testimony from Boston Corbett, the man who killed John Wilkes Booth. We have artifacts from Antietam, Mary Todd Lincoln, and even Marilyn Monroe. And of course, his iconic stovepipe hat. And In our own style here at the Reagan Library, we decided to take it to a different level. We blended this rich and robust history with the glamour and excitement of Hollywood. Who here hasn't heard of or seen the remarkable Steven Spielberg-directed film, Lincoln? Our exhibit team reached out to DreamWorks and, through a great partnership, was able to obtain some of the costumes and Oscar-winning sets from Mr. Spielberg's film. These include the entire set of President Lincoln's office, which, by the way, is as close as you will ever get to knowing what it was like when he was president. Portions of Mary Todd Lincoln's bedroom, portions of the Petersons' boarding house, as well as Oscar-nominated costumes for Mary Todd Lincoln, Tad Lincoln, and of course, President Lincoln. Our first speaker is truly a remarkable woman. She's been collecting Lincoln memorabilia for over 35 years and has been a friend of the Reagan Library for over a decade. You may have read about her a few years ago when a majority of her collection went to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum in Springfield. But she's more than just a collector, a Lincoln expert, or a historian. She's a woman who can get things done. She co-curated the exhibit and was instrumental in helping our curatorial team secure many of the iconic and historically significant items. Simply put, without Louise, we could not have done this. When Louise Taper calls, people answer the phone. We will always be grateful for her efforts and her friendship. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Louise Taper.
I am deeply honored to be here this evening at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library and Museum. When Duke Blackwood, director of the library, called to say he wanted to do a Lincoln exhibition, I was thrilled. We had worked together on 2 smaller exhibitions in the past. He explained that the new show was going to be 5,000 square feet. What an opportunity to showcase our 16th president, Abraham Lincoln. To be a collector, you need more than just being able to purchase a piece. You need the passion and the wisdom and the vision to know what to do. When I started collecting over 35 years ago, it was basically a pursuit by men. As a woman, no one took me seriously. I would tell people about my hours of searching catalogs and reading biographies. I'd tell them proudly that I was a Lincoln collector. They would laugh and joke and ask me if I was referring to pennies or $5 bills. My interest started when I read a historical novel on the Lincolns and wanted to know more about them. From that moment on, I was hooked. My collecting began with books, nothing fancy, and certainly none were first editions. I bought what I could afford. I devoured all and read everything. A few years later, I was hired to do research for a television series called Sandburg's Lincoln, produced by David Wolper. Hal Holbrook, who played Lincoln, won the Emmy Award for Best Actor that year, and I couldn't believe I was being paid to do what I loved to do. As my knowledge increased, so did my passion. While most collectors focused on rare books and manuscripts, I wanted to go beyond that and include artifacts and sculpture. I wanted to collect all parts of Lincoln's life. In the exhibition is a pardon written on a bandage for an unknown young soldier. On that day, Lincoln had accompanied Mary to visit a military hospital in Washington, D.C. During his presidency, Lincoln signed many executive pardons printed on paper, but this unique piece was written out when there was none at hand. Lincoln resorted to whatever he could find, a piece of cloth bandage. Lincoln always loved California, and on his final carriage ride with Mary, they discussed taking a trip out here. One of the highlights of my collection is a copy of the California Emancipation Proclamation showcased in this exhibition. This is the first California printing of the famous document, signed by Abraham Lincoln. The lithographer was a young teenage boy from San Francisco. When you go inside, you're going to see different examples of Lincoln presidential china, crystal, and silver. When collecting the presidential china, I was fortunate enough to purchase a truly unusual and prized item, the presidential chamber pot. This piece is from the same exquisite Solferino pattern that we see in the Lincoln presidential china. And as a compliment, we have a piece belonging to Mary Lincoln. A few years ago, her commode was up for auction. I couldn't resist it. So you will see these interesting pairs of artifacts later this evening. When the USS Abraham Lincoln aircraft carrier was commissioned, a special edition of the Lincoln Haviland White House china was made. I was so excited at the chance to have a presidential dinner party that I quickly purchased service for 12 and one extra set in case I broke a piece. Months later, I got a phone call from a dealer saying that they needed to sell off the remaining pieces. When I heard the price, I told him I wasn't interested. He said, make a crazy offer. And I said, how crazy? And he said, as crazy as you want. So I did, but I forgot to ask him how many sets were left. So I now own service for about 80 or 90 people. I have a Lincoln sculpture garden in my home. In the entry courtyard is a monumental bronze head of Lincoln by Gutzon Borglum, the same as the one at the Lincoln Tomb and at the White House. In my backyard, there's a life-size standing bronze of Abraham Lincoln, and if you take a glance out the window, you will swear that the famous president himself is walking towards you. There's also a seated Lincoln that, when kids come over, they love to climb on it. You will never believe that a very famous Lincoln admirer was Marilyn Monroe. I went to a Christie's auction preview in Beverly Hills of the contents of Marilyn Monroe's home. I was surprised to see that she had a bust of Carl Sandburg, the famous Lincoln biographer. On the wall above the sculpture was a photograph of Marilyn and Carl Sandburg. It looked like they were dancing. The story goes that Marilyn wanted to admire a father figure. Arthur Miller, her husband at the time, said she should admire and study Abraham Lincoln. So she did. She read a lot of books on Lincoln. While she was doing her last film, Something's Gotta Give, at 20th Century Fox, she heard that Carl Sandburg was on the next soundstage. She wanted to meet Sandburg, so the producer of the film gave a small dinner party. Arnold Newman, the famous photographer, was there also and took pictures of the evening. I purchased the Sandburg bus and also had to buy one of her dresses. The next day, I called Arnold Newman in New York to make an appointment to see him because I wanted the photographs. He was in his 80s and extremely busy, still working. He told me he would give me 1 hour, but I had to wait 3 months to go. I went with a friend of mine who's here tonight, and he was so fascinated with me, we ended up spending 3 days together. He told me that Marilyn had come to New York to see him to view the photographs of that evening. There's one that shows Marilyn sitting with Sandburg on a couch. She took Newman's orange marker and circled her stomach, and she told him she didn't like how she looked. I was excited that she had actually written on it because it became even more valuable. I ended up buying 7 original photos to go with the bust and the dress, and they are here on display. They now belong to the Abraham Lincoln Presidential Library and Museum, along with 1,600 other pieces from my collection. Mary Lincoln was always criticized for the amount of trunks she had. If it wasn't for her preserving these things, we wouldn't have them here today at the Ronald Reagan Presidential Library for you to see. It is a joy to collect, but it is also a joy to share what you collect. I would like to thank my co-curator, Andrew Wolf, and his wonderful staff for all their hard work over the past months. Duke Blackwood, who made it a reality, Tony Chavot, Deputy Director, and Glenn Baker, the CFO of the Ronald Reagan Presidential Foundation, for his continuing efforts on behalf of this great institution. And I personally would like to thank all the Lincoln collectors and institutions that have loaned their wonderful pieces for this exhibition. There are over 30 lenders, and we started with 300 artifacts. And would you all stand and be recognized together? We are the ones that keep Lincoln's memory alive through the gathering and assembling of manuscripts, artifacts, rare books, paintings, and sculpture. It is our responsibility to be caretakers and to preserve and protect these extraordinary pieces of Lincolniana for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you, Louise. We are honored to have our next speaker with us this evening. As I mentioned earlier, our exhibit links history with Hollywood. And who better to discuss our Hollywood partnership than the man himself who won the Oscar for the production design on DreamWorks' film Lincoln. Rick Carter's bio is quite impressive. 4 Oscar nominations, taking away 2 of the golden statues, 1 for Lincoln and 1 for Avatar. Not to mention a host of other awards from the Art Directors Guild and BAFTA, among others. As I understand it, he flies out tomorrow morning to work on his next project, which I'm sure will be a huge success. Ladies and gentlemen, Rick Carter.
I want to start by saying I'm not a public speaker, and so forgive me for being informal with my remarks. It struck me what was just said, for generations to come, that these are the words that I think define not only what you're doing here tonight, but what this library is, and also what I think we attempted on Steven Spielberg's movie Lincoln to accomplish, which was to honor the past and bring it to the present tense and to give it a way forward for generations to come. As a set designer, I have, on one hand, a technical job to do, particularly if it's a period piece, so that I could tell you that you'll see a couple of photographs of Lincoln that were taken in his office, and we could look at those, and we could try our best, with the help of Laura Bush's reconstruction of the Lincoln bedroom, to be as accurate as possible in our depiction of that exact office. But much more important is the emotion that goes into it. It was the emotion of the suspension of disbelief that we were making a movie at all, but that rather that we were making some form of a, I want to say historical document, but I actually want to say a spiritual document. And I think it's what Daniel Day-Lewis and Steven Spielberg and Tony Kushner and Kathy Kennedy and all of those that worked on that movie felt, because you're in the service of something greater. And the greater is so obvious when it's Lincoln, because it's not only greatness, but it's liberty. And it is about being free, and it's fundamental to being free if you're speaking Lincoln. He speaks a language that's, his very presence is biblical. So for us to create a set, you're looking at walls, and you're looking at artifacts, and you're looking at various things that are all reproductions, and they're all illusions. What I hope is that in this context, which is, for me, is literally like a rebirth of that set, there's the possibility of realizing that what you're looking at in the beginning is artifacts that are true and real, and from the real Abraham Lincoln. And then there's a certain point where that's maybe a little distant just because it's behind glass or it's something that you can't really touch because it's really too important for you to touch. But actually, then you can move to a space which is an illusion of his office and where he made all of those decisions that we still revere today. And it's impossible in this context for me not to feel the connection with Ronald Reagan, because if you think about someone like Lincoln and how great he was in the sense of what he did for our country and for the world, and had to make those decisions, and they're real, and they're real people he's talking with, and when people's lives are on the line, and if he decides to go to war, then people die. And in Lincoln's time, there's 700,000 Americans who died, let alone all those that were maimed. For Ronald Reagan, remember, any of us, probably everyone, but here because you're old enough, know that there were all those warheads facing us. That was real. Those were the decisions that were being made in the Oval Office that's here is very much a replica, but resonant with the real, actual leadership burdens that a president carries. And for the very fact, it struck me today that we could be honoring a 16th president 150 years ago, and it's a president's library here speaks to what happened in the Civil War and the nation that we became. And so I know that I'm not speaking as a set designer, but I hope to be speaking from my heart and saying this is a very, very important stage for us, the filmmakers, in having our set be included in actual, real historical artifacts and in a context that hopefully let your mind wander around in that office and wonder what's in that brown paper bag, package, or just to know that we did everything we could to be as accurate as possible, hoping that something like this might happen, and that the Ronald Reagan Library was able to pull together the funding through all of your help and make this possible really gives a new birth of not just freedom, but sort of existence for not just the sets, but the legacy of Lincoln. And by the way, when you move through and past that set, and hopefully you've immersed yourself at that point a little bit, you're going to see some things, while they're very, very simple, but are absolutely profound to encounter. And I'm not going to tell you which ones those are, because those are for you to feel yourself. Anyway, that's really all I have to say.
Thank you, Rick. Our final speaker is with Wells Fargo. The Reagan Foundation has a long and wonderful relationship with the bank, and it's their generosity that underwrote both this evening's reception as well as the exhibit catalog. Ladies and gentlemen, the Executive Vice President and Head of Wealth, Brokerage, Retirement Business Services Group at Wells Fargo, Christy Deacon. Christy?
Thank you, Duke. On behalf of Wells Fargo, I am really delighted to be here tonight to share with you this very special and important collection that's been assembled. Presidents Lincoln and Reagan are probably the best communicators and unifiers of the 19th and 20th centuries. And their presidential libraries and museums are a real testament and a center of excellence for us to be able to see and learn about the great stories and issues all through American history. The ideals of education, honest communication, and courtesy are really core to Wells Fargo. And the ability to support this exhibit is a really wonderful extension for us to be able to participate, because that's how we hope to work every day in our businesses and in our communities. This exhibit is going to hold great appeal for all of us who enjoy American history, from students to scholars, to people that think of things as being from a different time and in a different way than today. There's so much that we can learn from this period in time that applies to a lot of the situations that we have today. All kinds of unrest and unparalleled obstacles, whether it's economic or social or political. And I hope everyone that gets to visit this exhibit can really see a time when leadership and unity were a strong focus and a real talk of the greater good when we look at the national discussions that we have. Well, in the spirit of Lincoln and the Gettysburg Address, which is considered by many to be one of the greatest speeches in American history, I am going to do like Lincoln and limit my remarks to 270 words, which is the most often cited length of this address. And I thank you for sharing this opening, and I hope that you enjoy just a thrilling time with this special day. Thank you.
Okay, that was pretty good, Christy. I like that one. All right, let's get on with the show. But I would like to conclude with the sentiment of our 40th president, Ronald Reagan. He said, "In our own lives, let us strive to live up to Lincoln's example, his respect for gentleness, for knowledge, his humor, his tolerance of his fellow men, and his abiding love for America." Thank you, and please enjoy the exhibit.